I think it's the same.
It's the same. Okay.
Let's see.
All right. Well, we are recording. With me, I have Dr. Aparna Tarc, and I want to thank you, Dr. Tarc, for joining me in this conversation for my students who are in the process of writing proposals and dissertations and writing up their data. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you to begin our conversation was to get you to talk about your writing rituals. How do you write?
That's such a good question. I mean, I really feel like the people who have a sense of how they are also strong writers. I feel like those who can't explain how they write are probably, they probably still can produce lovely work, but I feel like it's more. So I would say you should always be reflecting a little bit on the way that you write as like one of your rituals. Is like, what are the things you need to do? So for me, I do need to be so like I have a clear kind of mind. So I always do some writing, even if it's not going to go anywhere, but I do some writing in the morning. I also probably read at least like 4 or 5 pieces of poetry every single day. Before I write, after I write, during I write. So I take a break from academic writing all the time. In order to think about turns of phrase as critical to my argument, but also to my pedagogy. So I really feel the pedagogy of writing is more a compelling force for me than actually even what I'm going to say sometimes. I tend to be the kind of writer that writes everything, and it's a real mess. And for me, the real writing is in revising. I have to revise. I don't know. I don't think any less than 10 times. I have to revise paragraphs, pages. So I try to let myself be very free and unstructured in that for to being more structured, like having an outline and um, keep limiting myself to these are the 3 things I want to say in this article, because I do find sometimes I've got 10 articles in one and then I have to separate out later. So I do drink coffee to help with the writing. Like if I'm ever in a block or am I ever stuck, then I have to turn to other people to try to find my voice again. I think that if you don't have a sense of your voice, you will never be able to write. You'll just be mimicking. I think there's a difference between writing that as training and then writing as a writer. There's a real difference. You can't have one without the other. So you do need training, and you do need to do some of these exercises that creative writers do, and also academic writers do. Grant writing, all of that are exercises. But to really be a writer, you need to be able to not mimic and copy others. Yeah. Is there anything else?
No, that's wonderful. And some of what you said is some of what I tell my students, and I talk to them about making writing your friend. So we have a secret Facebook group called Words on Paper.
Oh, that's nice.
So we call it Words on Paper, and basically we say that just put the words on paper, you will make it pretty later. But just give yourself permission to be bad and put the words on paper, because we're very harsh on ourselves and we want to have everything done perfectly. And doctoral students are often obviously very high achieving students, and they have this OCD type perfectionist disposition that they may bring in because they've done well in school. They always want to do well in school, but writing is that wall they hit because it's to do it well, it requires a lot of practice, which means you're not going to be perfect round one, or even round 20. It just feels
No.
like it's always a process. And I look back at things that have been published and I think I could have done better. If I wrote it now, it would be stronger. Nobody should read that piece in 2009.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the starting point has to be that most writing is a failure. It's a failure to communicate and what it does. I mean, this is the kind of Derridian kind of view, is that what it does, it makes you realize how difficult spoken communication is, because you trick yourself into thinking, oh well, the other understands me, but they don't. And then when you write, you realize that how much you can't even understand yourself. So how else would someone really be able to understand you? How what does it take to make your writing communicable to someone else? It's suffering, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, writing comes with a bit of suffering, I would say. Yeah.
Do you read and write at the same time, or do you read first, write, then read? How does that work out for you?
Well, what I do usually is I've read a lot, so I do feel like people have to read a lot to be able to write. And a lot of the time. And so what I do when I'm actually writing is I remember something that I've read, and then I'll go back and consult it. And and I have a pretty good memory, so I can even remember like what the words look like on the page of an article. So if I read something by you and I was writing something and I realized, well, that's not really my idea. That's the idea of my colleague, or that's the idea of Adrian, and look for that text, and then it just becomes part of my own language. So whenever I'm stuck, I read a lot and I forget about writing. But I feel like in order to write, you've got to leave your reading behind. And then if you need to consult with your reading, then you consult while you're writing. So I try not to, I mean, I couldn't be reading something and then start writing my own stuff. Some people are really good at that, and they even write in books. They write their own papers in someone else's book that they're reading. I can't do that.
Yeah.
I think I'm too selfish.
So then
I can't have any distraction.
So when you're writing, you're just writing your stuff, and if you remember things that you have read from somewhere, if you need to consult, you're consulting, but you're trying to first get what your ideas are on paper first.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Always. I'm always faithful. I'm always faithful to my own mind first. Like, I mean, I have trained myself in different ways. Like, I've actually written out pages of text from other writers to try to really inhabit the idea of who I'm working with. In my style with it. I'm a real big advocate of a citation practice that not only does justice to the actual content. I was working with your writing, for instance, I would try to use your entanglement approach in my writing. I wouldn't just say this is what Dr. Bhattacharya says. I would say this is how I feel what she's trying to say through the writing practice.
Mm-hmm. One of the things my students find it very challenging is when they try to write up research results, and then they have to integrate the empirical data that they have from participants, but they also have to understand and represent it through a theoretical, analytical, methodological framing, and bring in so many different things in one space. And that is something that they don't have any prior training. Most of them don't. Most of my folks don't come from a creative writing background where they know how to bring in multiple voices and blend theory into representation. They don't have that. So what are some of the ways you have navigated that in your own work?
Yeah, and this is what I've navigated in my work, and this is what I tell my students. I tell my students, do not apply, is find the theory in the data. You have to find the theory you're working with in the data. So if I'm working with the post-colonial theory, for instance, right, and I'm working with a concept like hybridity, where you know, the colonized and the colonizer, their aesthetics and their ways of being, someone is both, can be both Indian and both Western, and it's like it's this creative new space. So if I'm talking about something like that, I will wait to find that in my data. Yes. Invariably, fluidity will come across when somebody's trying to explain their lived reality to me, and then I will use that moment. I will, you know, do data selection of that moment, because that's the moment that where my theory and what's actually happening to someone, there's something resounded in the way that my participants are speaking that resounds theory, from the ground up. So I think what's typically done in research courses is we tell students, do your data analysis, select your data, code it this way, and so that's that part of the work. And then the theory part of the work is the framework that comes before, and then they select pieces of data and then try to apply the theory to it. And I'm saying don't do that. I'm saying engage in your data the way you would in any theory. In any theory, engage in it reflectively, look for moments of significance, and your theory just comes out of everyday life. It
Right.
isn't something special, you know, that is outside of it.
Yeah.
So, and then you don't have to do all of this like incorporating work.
Mm.
Instead, you say, this is an instance of hybridity, or this is an instance of decolonization, or this is an instance where um, some it's not phenon, it's who talks about double consciousness?
Good boy.
Du Bois.
Yeah.
So this is the way Du Bois thinks about double consciousness. And look, my participant actually has triple consciousness, because
Yeah.
you know, they're a woman and they're brown and they're right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's really
So
cool.
what should be most important to us is the actual educational experience, the lived reality, the ways in which a student will say, I can't get an idea in my head, right? And then we can talk about the inner life in psychoanalysis, because the child is talking about all these thoughts in their head that the teacher can't hear but are still important to their learning process,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I feel like we sometimes go about it the wrong way.
No, I love that, because I think that some of our academic practices are so linear when we do research process. Like first you do this, or then you do this. And as I'm growing older in my career, I almost want to say things can come from practice, like practice-based emergent process. Like, so you can engage in a practice, which the practice could be art, the practice could be conversations, the practice could be a general curiosity about somebody's life, and having a conversation about that. And then based on that, you generate questions, and you generate, where you need to go, as opposed to sometimes we're so removed from those lived realities and embodied understandings.
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, well, I mean, no, I would agree. I agree. I mean, I feel like sometimes the students are saying, "Well, my qualitative methods person said I have to triangulate, and there has to be validity, and there has to be evidence." And and I say, "Well, why? I mean, what? Like for what? You can't prove that somebody's lived reality is science." Other approach where we just try to tell a compelling story about learning and hope that is compelling enough that someone will say, yeah, that's how I feel when I learn. Actually, my head feels conflicted, full of ideas. That's more compelling to me than any brain-based science that said this is how the brain works.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we have to, we know what our paradigms are, but we're still unsure of them. We're
Right.
still afraid to say, look, I'm not going to follow. They actually don't apply to this situation where learning is complex, where it's entangled, where it's full of conflict. There is no linear, because they're not really feeling anything, you
Yeah.
know.
And I think there's this push, this evidence-based, discourse are pushing people to say that, very post-positivist way to say, like, okay, fine, you want to have qualitative research, but tell me how you know what you know is the truth. Well, I don't know that that's the truth. I don't even know if the participants are telling me the truth. I'm not even trying to question the participants whether they're telling me the truth. And that kind of thing puts everybody into this unsettled, ambiguous space. And then people are like, well, then people can tell you anything. Yep, they can tell me anything. I'm not sure that I will know it, in the way I will know that, the sun did rise at this time. I wouldn't know it in the most universally verifiable way. I wouldn't know that. I would never know that, and I'm okay with that. And I think then when you try to generate process around ambiguity, it becomes so incommensurable, because what is a process around ambiguity? You can't standardize that. So I appreciate you saying, sharing your wisdom on that, to say, generate those theories from your data, because if there is a process, that is probably the process that is.
I mean, it's not a popular. I think it's difficult for educational researchers to to actually acknowledge how much of our work is uncertain, and it doesn't help that all the granting agencies want you to, you have to play that game too, right? And I'm not, but I have been successful at compelling people to think, well, maybe this is the way that we learn. Maybe pedagogy is important, because not because we need to become CEOs, but we need to live a meaningful life,
Right.
you know. So I mean, it's just, you got to decide what your commitment is, right, and write to it. Yeah.
One of the things that you've already said is, what do you do when you're stuck? So you already talked about going and reading. You also talked about, reading poetry and moving out of academic genre and looking at turns of phrases and putting your head elsewhere. Is that what you think you would say that you do to up your game?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm more and more interested in translating academic work for broader audiences. So I spent a lot of time reading journals like the Atlantic or the Nation, in the Walrus in Canada, like literary newsy type of journalism, type of the New Yorker, LRB. So I spent Paris Review. I spent a lot of time reading work that straddles those worlds, and it's the hardest thing for me to let go of explication, and to let go of all of these ways that I feel academic writing is rigorous, but to let go of it a little bit, and so you can communicate. I've done. I now teach an art of writing course too, the way that you are, and I feel like that's been incredibly helpful, because I've been to attune myself more to my own writing process through my students, because they're really, really keyed into theirs. I think it's helped my students as well up their game. I feel like some of them are just like such beautiful creative writers. Like, what are they doing in academia in a way, which is so deadening. But I feel like our job as academics is to make our work more creative. It should be creative. It should be meaningful. And so anything that we do to up our game actually helps us change the profession a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and change what good writing is in the academic circles. It's slow work, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It's slow work. The one thing I'd like to do, and I know you do, of just like-minded, creative people, and maybe not all academics, like just a range of people, journalists,
Mm-hmm.
academics, poets, just to get a sense of like the different genres and how they can work together.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, I'd love to do that one day. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, because I often have interesting conversations with people outside of academia who's interested in the work that I do, but obviously I am using different language, different way of talking about it, because they're intelligent people. They just haven't read everything I have read, and I haven't read everything they have read.
Yeah.
And that type of communication across discipline is far harder than talking to the people who have read what you have read.
Right. I mean, it's really important to engage in different discourse communities. Um, and, if you really want to do interdisciplinary work, you actually have to talk to someone who's in anthropology, or talk to a philosopher, you have to, or a women's studies scholar. We have to, and we're so, the policing thing is such it's because I feel like it really just limits and gatekeeps us, rather than, if the student said to me, I have one student said they wanted to do a collaborative dissertation, and another professor at another university said, you'll never be able to do that. Well, why would you say that? About how it can still be original, and they can do some of it together. Why not? I mean, who says no? Why do you say no? Don't say no. That's what I say.
Break all the rules. That's what I say. So to conclude, what I want to do
I
is,
mean, this is a great job we're in. This is great work we're in.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, continue.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was going to say, to conclude, I want to feature 3 of your work that I think students should read. I mean, I have my preference, but I want to hear, what 3 things would you recommend that students would read?
Well, I do. I feel like my book, Literacy of the Other, is probably my most important. And if I didn't write another thing in my life, I'm glad that I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
So that for sure. My essay reparative curriculum, that's in curriculum inquiry, is an important work, and talk it because it really gives students an idea of what my framings are. And the third work, I think the qualitative research piece that I wrote, it's in QSE, and it's called Wild Reading, I think. I'll have to look it up. But that would be the third one. And that's a nice piece because it talks about, it shows how I use literature as my object for educational research. And I think it's an interesting, because it sort of fits into my notions that, so much of, and I mean, it's what Clendenin and Connolly talk about how education is so structured by narrative. And so fiction seems to be the thing of education, so that when we do talk about, I mean, my work is really interested in non-evident knowledge, unspeakable knowledge, knowledge that comes from what Toni Morrison says, the most unimaginable kinds of social conditions, whether it's been an experience of race, experience of child abuse, an experience of education that makes you feel ashamed of yourself. So I'm really interested in unearthing unspeakable knowledge that's still true. That's still true. So just because you can't prove it doesn't mean it isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to look through. I mean, this is kind of an impossible project in the research field where everything is about evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like if so much of learning is non-evident, I care why I'm affected by this knowledge and not that knowledge, or how it is that my mother's experience is actually an education for me. There's no proof for that. But I know that's as important to me as any curriculum that I've learned that is legitimate and important.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it that we can account for those experiences? So that's what my, probably since I was a small child, is how is it that someone knows what they know? And how is it they come to know other knowledge that it actually is more important to them than what they learned in school?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those kind of questions that I really, really push at. And I think that they also, I feel like that's something all of us share. Every human being shares this unique way of engaging with objects in the world and others that is as vital to their life as breathing, eating, or anything else. I mean, we need knowledge to live.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to track that. I try to follow this. It's an impossible project, but it's the only thing I care about.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. I want to thank you for taking the time and speaking with our students. I know they'll definitely read your work. We'll have the video posted in YouTube, and then your work will be in our Canvas course with links to the pieces that you have already cited for us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. And the only real, the bottom line for me is read everything.
Right.
Read, read, read. And words, it'll feel like, wow, this is my new vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you expand your vocabulary, I think the more ways in which it's really vocabulary building. I think writing is like the more ways we have to say something. That's why it's so sad when people lose their language.
Right.
The more ways we have to say something, the more ways we can bring insight and significance to others.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, so my real thing is read everything if you want to learn to write.
Right.
So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.